Welcome to the American Presidency, the man, his policy, his foes. I'm Mike Stover. Today is Tuesday, June 22nd. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for joining us. As always, I want to thank Jim and Ellie Monroe for serving as co-host technical coordinators for today. This course is about the American presidency and its consequential role in our republic. The views I expressed are based on my information sources, my academic training, as well as my professional and life experiences. I strive to be fair, yet I recognize that avoiding bias while providing an informed point of view is a balancing act that I will not achieve on some or even most occasions, but I will try. I encourage you to use the information and commentary presented in this class as only one of many sources to help you remain an informed citizen. I want to encourage you to participate in our discussion segments. Please freely express contrasting viewpoints, but do so in the context of always commitment to mutual respect and civility among members. In today's class, we'll examine the Biden presidency, its priorities and challenges. That Mr. Biden has moved from many honeymoon period that might have previously existed to the hard realities of the presidency. His popularity, in fact, is declining, surprisingly, mainly among Democrats. Let's begin our discussion on the president's recent trip to Europe. The president said, "I did what I came to do." Let's talk about the trip. Notice I have the wrong date on that slide. It's June 22nd. The presidency was the president moved into his Europe trip with an advantage. The American reputation in Europe had increased over that of his predecessor, both in terms of the individual president and also the country. Among European citizens, a very high regard compared to his predecessor. However, the American reputation as a reliable partner is not as solid as it once was, but still so much better than most other countries. In fact, in Germany, only the German reputation, surprisingly, was higher on some measures. Considering the history of Germany, that's a lot to be said. The trip began, as you might recall, in our special relationship country of the United Kingdom with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, who was, I think, and is an ideological friend with our former president, certainly rolled out the royal carpet for Mr. Biden, tried to find a lot of areas of agreement. The Queen was very gracious, as she is to other world leaders, to Mr. Biden. Lots of smiles. The G7 countries of the largest economies, free economies, had what looked from all vantage points a fairly successful to very successful meeting. He asked leaders of those countries to take a harder line with China than they have in the past, and got some positive feedback in that regard, considering the realities of the moments in which China is such a very important trading partners for many of those countries. How important, I think this slide shows very well, that China's trade with the European Union in particular is very striking. Just look at those numbers. Percentage of European Union trade in merchandise with China, which is even more robust than with the United States. Once the G7 leaders agreed to do, I think it was 500 million vaccines to distribute to other countries as part of commitment. Of course, that is important, but some say that as many as 11 trillion doses may be necessary. Very important, but still a way to go. President then went on to Brussels. In Brussels, he met with the European Union. He met with NATO. He met with the chair and the leader of the European community. And in the discussion with those leaders, and of course these things are worked out in diplomatic channels way before a president actually shows up at these conferences, that they agreed to stand back from some of the recent tit-for-tat tariffs, and particularly the tit-for-tat tariffs on the Airbus and Boeing dispute, in which both the U.S. and the European Union claim that the other side is subsidizing through governmental incentives. At our level, mainly in state governmental incentives, while in Europe, more national governmental incentives, moving back from that precipice. The good news for so many American businesses that have big footprints in Europe and selling to Europeans, such as whiskey makers, a suspension of additional tariffs and some of the existing tariffs is very important. So that's good news to everyone. Moving on to NATO, Mr. Biden unequivocally gave support for NATO's mission and key principle of mutual self-defense. For the most part, that means extending our military shield and our nuclear shield to European countries. But remember, France has nuclear weapons, and UK already have nuclear weapons as well to defend themselves and other NATO countries. Then on to Geneva, and meeting with Mr. Putin in what could be in the previous administration, much about the cosmetics of the meeting. I think in this case, there was also a lot about the substance of the meeting. The two leaders did not have a joint news conference. That was at the request of Mr. Biden. He did not want to do a joint news conference with Mr. Putin. So Mr. Putin had one first, and then Mr. Biden. Biden said there was 3 levels of Russian-American interests: those that we can have mutual interests in, those in which we have American interests to defend, and others that will that deal with our great commitment to democracy and human rights. Mr. Putin trying to put the best face forward and trying to seem to want to distinguish himself a little bit from being too wedded to Mr. Biden's predecessor, praised the summit results, called Biden a tough negotiator. President Biden, going into the sessions and after the sessions, reiterated that instead of trust and verify the Russians, that in large measure in areas where we have conflicting interests, you have to distrust and verify their actions. You have to be realistic about what can be achieved. The Wall Street Journal pointed out in the editorial that both leaders took a measure of each other, presumably much better than what occurred if, for those who are scholars of the first Kennedy Khrushchev one, in which Khrushchev much overestimated his personal power over the young Mr. Kennedy at the time, that led to some strategic miscalculations that some would say led right to the Cuban Missile Crisis later. Some commentators wanted to stress this point, and I think it's a good point, that Russia is a major country. It has enough nuclear weapons to end civilization, not only in our country, but in our allies, and so do we. But while Russia is a strong military power, both in nuclear and conventional weapons, their economy is much smaller than other economies. Their economy is even smaller than the Canadian economy. And while they spend a lot of money on military spending, they hardly are rivaling us in spending. Look at the comparison between us and Russia, or China and Russia, or even India, Saudi Arabia, and France and Russia in terms of spending. Still, Russia is a major arms exporter. So are we. Russia has more nuclear warheads than we do, but the ability to deliver those precisely and from the locations that we have at least equal, if not a superior ability to actually deliver the weapon. But it doesn't make any difference since there's more than enough weapons to end the world. The Wall Street Journal, in a sour note on the president's trip, was that Mr. Biden can talk tough, but if he doesn't grow the military budget, Putin will see through that. Still, were plenty of commentary that that the trip was good, and it highlighted some many good things. The Wall Street Journal's executive Washington editor, not their opinion editor, their executive Washington editor wrote just the other day that the trip demonstrated the strength of the American model and how no one in democracies are rioting in favor of a Russia-style democracy or a Chinese-style democracy. They're not rioting in behalf of Putin in Western democracies. So let's talk about some of this. Was the trip worth it? Are these types of summits that you don't really know the results for several months afterwards worth it? It's a lot of just showbiz, or do they play a real important role in your view? And should Mr. Biden spend a lot of his time and diplomatic capital pursuing the issues of democratic freedom?
Mike, you got muted.
Or should we be more? Should we pursue human rights and democratic freedoms as a key foreign policy options, or should we be more focused, like his predecessor administration, and be more transactional in our objectives on such things as trade and weapon controls, or establishing strong personal relationships? So let's talk about that, and I'll get back so we can see you as you raise your hand, and Ellie will recognize you. Thank you all. Ellie?
I'm waiting for hands to come up.
Oh.
Oh, let me see what's in the chat. Oh, never mind. That's just a comment on recording.
Okay, anyone want to talk about any of those things? How important is human rights? Should we put it right in our agenda? There's only so much things you can transact on.
Okay, JR has his hand up.
Good.
Yeah, I thought the trip was really important. The fact that when he met with Putin, what he did is you saw he had an experienced team with him, and they came. And what I think they did is they had their one-on-one, and then at the end of it, the teams met each other so they could start working some of these problems like cyber and so forth. And we're seeing an expertise in our foreign policy, a strategy. And that's what we've been missing. You know, they didn't have Ivanka and all those people there. They had people that really knew what they were doing. The thing you didn't see or you didn't put up was, yeah, Biden's got really high marks, but our country is a democratic beacon. Those numbers are terrible. And that's the biggest problem I think we have with our foreign policy. We want to promote democracy, but people have seen what has happened in our country, and we really got to get our act together. That's really the message I got. And,
Thank you very much.
Pat Dufier.
Pat.
Ms. Patricia. There you go. Okay.
I think one of the best things he did was to elevate the reputation of the United States again. I think we have reinforced our reputation in the European countries, and he showed a more formal and kinder president. And I think it reflected back to the place the United States had after the World War II. And I think that's a very good thing. So getting the respect of the world back, I don't think can be underestimated. I think it's a good foundation to go from here.
Thank you very much.
Good. Michael Sultan.
Yeah, I only have one comment to make, and that was just around the fact that the Russians and the Americans are on the same page when it comes to Iran. And that seems to be something we desperately need to avoid very serious confrontation and all the ramifications. And I think that, while that wasn't high profile, I think that was a big deal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Talento.
I have to say, personally, I feel safer. All of a sudden, instead of our old friends being enemies or people that we aren't related to, we're now again surrounded by the people, the European Union, NATO. We're back with them again, and that makes me feel safer, knowing that we have people to back us up.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me pull this back into all those are great comments. I appreciate that. Thank you all. Let's pull it back to the next topic areas. Just hold this across. Okay, let's talk about the president's priorities in getting implemented, particularly this year. The White House published this the other day to show that they're doing just fine. Of course, every White House puts out some version of this. The left-hand column just changes, and they do a little bit of cherry picking of what dates in previous administration. I think the White House is feeling the pressure, particularly from the Democratic left, who feel that the White House should be moving more quickly and getting congressional approval, strong arming the 50-member, the 50-50 majority it has in the Senate to get more done. So the White House is back in trying to message a lot has been done, even if some of the issues immediately ahead are very difficult. And the issues immediately ahead, of course, remain the pandemic, economic recovery, getting infrastructure funded, and obviously through the Congress as a consequence, and making some form of racial progress in the short term, at least in terms of voting rights legislation. Let's start with voting rights, because today, in just a few minutes, and may literally occur while we talk, is that Senate Republicans are likely to vote to block any debate on a key Democratic piece of legislation dealing with expansion of voting rights in the United States. Now, Republicans will give strong arguments of why that's not warranted and how they do, congressional and senatorial Republicans, how they do support voting rights, but they also support voting security. But this is a key issue to Democrats, and it's a key one that's likely to fail, at least in its initial attempt today. So let's go through some of the reasons. One, the Republicans look united with essentially all of their caucus following Senator McConnell. And to begin debate in the Senate, you need to have 60 votes, 60 votes. Republicans have 5-0 votes. So they can lose 9 members and still block any discussion. So that when Republicans say they are not, when the Senate Minority Leader Senator McConnell says he's not going to allow that to move forward, it's not going to move forward because he has the votes to stop it. Democratic progressives realize that losing the control of the House, if they are less successful because of voting rights restrictions in states in the midterm election, that they can have the best president in the White House, but if they can't get it through the Congress, they'll just be frustrated, and they are feeling very, very frustrated at this point. There's essentially 3 pieces of legislation that could perhaps someday reach the Senate in this year. One, the bill that's before the Senate today that appears to have no chance in moving forward. The John Lewis Act, which is reconstituting the Supreme Court weakened Voting Rights Act, that will be in legislative shape in 2 or 3 months, but not before the Congress at this point. And the compromise by U.S. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who's not only a former state legislator, but is a former Secretary of State as well as governor of the state of West Virginia. It's an area in which he has some expertise, and he has a compromise recently that President Obama said was well worth taking. If we can get that, that's worth taking, which is much less ambitious than the piece of legislation that they're wanting to debate today that came over from the House of Representatives, H.R. 1. To understand this issue a little bit in perspective, we go back to the 15th Amendment. 15th Amendment passed during the civil rights Reconstruction era, established a mechanism to ensure that persons are not denied the right to vote. Actually, it was if you read it closely or read some accounts of it, as it was to ensure that minority men could not be deprived, but later when the Constitution was amended on women, it added women as well. But that amendment only allows kind of the courts to strike down laws. There was no real effective enforcement mechanism. And that's why the South during the Jim Crow era came up with some really ever-changing inventory of ways to frustrate African Americans and other poor minorities from voting. That's where Congress came up with, under Lyndon Johnson, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, an act that Johnson knew would cost Democrats the South for decades, but he felt it was so important to get done. And that act has been one of the most successful civil rights acts in our history, but has been curtailed in recent years by interpretations by the Supreme Court, one of which may come out today or this week, that will uphold likely on some Arizona restrictions voted on by the legislature and were in effect recently. So we'll see what will happen on this. Today will be a day of lots of frustrations among Democrats on the voting rights bill. So one other point on this I want to make is that so far there doesn't seem to be an intensity among general voters on the issue of voting rights. I guess that is, if you're not restricted, you're not particularly concerned. If your party is disadvantaged in your view by the current pandemic expansion of voting rights or voting access, you're not enthusiastic about continuing those. If you believe that there's a lot of voter fraud and lack of election security, you probably are going to be resistant of an expansion. But there's not a whole lot of, or at least some of the pollsters and some of the mainstream press have not found a whole lot of enthusiasm among general voters. This is an interesting topic I'm going to raise in our questions. We're going to go to the question discussion right now on this. And the question is, considering the Democratic voting rights legislation now before Congress, including the one today, the HR one that is also S1, to vastly expand federal standards for elections, also deal with reapportionment. It's a very comprehensive piece of legislation. If you can't get that, do you just give up and say that that you'd rather take a loss than a partial loaf of legislation, such as the compromise being offered by Senator Manchin, that may not have any votes other than his own, at least no other votes outside of the Democratic caucus. And here's the bigger question, I think, is not getting things done that the bigger threat to democracies than even voting rights at times? Is our system, do we have a systemic problem, not just a voting right access problem? Anyone want to talk about those subjects? If you do, please raise your hands and Elliot will recognize you. We'll give first priority to people who have not spoken initially.
Okay. Marilyn Wasserman has raised her hand.
Marilyn.
Okay. I've always heard that politics is the art of the possible. And therefore, I think it's better to work incrementally on these things. For example, as constituted, I think the Infrastructure Act doesn't have much of a chance to pass because it's been loaded with some things that aren't directly related to bridges and roads and rails and things like that. So I've always thought that an incremental approach, getting what you can, and then moving forward from that would be best. And that would move our democracy off of a path that we've been on where nothing gets done. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to talk about this subject?
Don't see any further hands or chat.
Okay. One other little bit of commentary I have on this one is that much of the, I see the hand is going up, so let's go to that one.
Okay, Marilyn Burnett.
Yes, I do
Marty
think,
Burnett.
yeah, I do think that the voting rights, this S1 is extremely comprehensive. It included campaign financing issues, it included ethical issues, campaign ethics. I do think that given the significance of many of the components, for example, the fact that individual states can overturn the electoral decision in national elections. I mean, there's some very key components that could be broken out of that legislation that I think should be attempted to pass, rather than, as the just previous speaker said, trying to do everything all at once. I think it needs to be done in a smaller way, and these things are critical. The gerrymandering, a few essential things should be in that and should be taken out and voted on separately.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There has been, according to the Brennan Center, a kind of a liberal think tank, they claim that 14 states have enacted more than 22 laws restricting voter access this year alone. 22 laws in 14 states.
Thank you, Marley. Steve Kearns.
Good morning. Well, I agree that the bill is necessary. It's important. It has a lot of good things. I think when we're losing sight of the concept that all that's going on here is politics. The Democrats had a sweeping bill that came in that had little chance of getting passed. And the Republicans said that they were not even going to address it at all. And everybody fought, and everybody was up in arms about lack of partisanship or too much partisanship, lack of bipartisanship. So what do? They got together, and Joe Manchin, who's been a demon for all of this, got together with a whole bunch of his colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats. He came up with 11 Republicans who were support of a compromise bill. And as soon as that got through the process, as soon as that bill became known and Democrats said, okay, we're okay with that. We can do that. We can do a little bit. We don't need to go all the way. Republicans said, no, we're not even going to consider that. That's now a Stacey Abrams bill, or it's a Barack Obama bill, and we're not even going to consider that. So, I mean, everything that's going on is just simply the politics of republicanism, trying to take power for whatever it is and not give the Democrats any kind of victory at all, because that hurts their chances in whatever future elections are going to happen.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more.
Barbara Talenta.
I think that blocking all of the legislation is detrimental to our democracy. And quite frankly, I think Mitch McConnell is a dictator who should be ousted from office because of the things that he's done. His blocking all voting on things that he doesn't want to see is ridiculous. And I wish that our politicians would stop being politicians and start being good citizens of this country. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. Let me go back here. Okay, let's move on to some of the other priorities of the administration. Of course, the pandemic remains probably the administration's one of its greatest success stories in terms of the bringing vaccination to Americans and to to states and local governments, providing great access. I think we have. I think they can proudly point to that. They didn't provide the incentives because they weren't empowered during the time in which the vaccines were being developed, but did have a unified messaging and unified all the government approach to get the vaccines to people, and had a lot of support along those lines even in some of the most red states, at least among the public health professionals. The number of cases are way down, the number of hospitalizations are way down, the number of deaths are way down, and good that they are, because we reached the milestone recently of 600,000 had been recorded dead because of the COVID virus in America. Yesterday, for the first time in over 15 months, we fell below 300 deaths in any given day. All deaths are tragic, but 300 certainly is much lower than 3,000 that we faced on some real bad days during the heights of the pandemic. And in many respects, we are in very solid territory. I think the White House will announce, or has announced, or will soon announce today, that they won't meet President Biden's goal of, oops, I guess I fell back here, won't meet President Biden's goal of 70% of the population, adult population, with at least one shot by July 4th. Likely that America will get to 67, 68%. The White House said today that 70% of the adults 27 and over will reach that, or have reached that. So that it's particularly among the younger segment of the population that the least interest in vaccination is occurring. Despite a lot of incentive programs that have kept some of the vaccination rates at least stable in some areas like California, while in other parts of the nation, there is a vast overmatch of vaccines to interested people. We have plenty of vaccines, so much so that we can ship many off to other countries without impinging on our supplies or availability at all. California last Tuesday, a week ago, reopened. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't find a whole lot difference in the times I went out, including times going out to dine in or shopping. I saw almost as many masks on or as many masks off, however you want to say it, as I did a week prior. But we see a lot of signs. We see Americans saying that between just a year ago, May, and June of this year, that the number of people who regularly visits friends or family has gone up 9 percentage points. People who shop in person and for essential items have gone up 19%. People who go to a restaurant or a bar gone up 25%. Traveling is up 13 percentage points. These are more than percent, these are percentage points. Exercise in the gym up, attending sporting events, going to movie concerts, movies and concerts are starting to go up across America, not only in California, but across America. And the government has announced, the federal government has announced money to expedite the development of an additional drug that would help in treating people that actually get a coronavirus, particularly this coronavirus or similar ones to it, to reduce the severity of it. And Pfizer and Merck, two large pharmaceutical companies, are apparently well along the way in developing one, and this will be kind of the mini warp speed for treatment methodologies. The current ones almost require hospitalization or medical office in order to get the types of cocktails necessary of a variety of different drugs. The Delta variant, formerly known as the Indian variant, is becoming the predominant variant in parts of the world and increasingly in parts of the US. as opposed to the Alpha variant, formerly known as the UK variant, that is the most dominant one until now, and likely to be overtaken by the Delta variant. And this variant is showing up, not surprisingly, among unvaccinated persons. Unvaccinated persons and breakthroughs on persons who've already been infected previously by the virus, but have not received a vaccine. Former FDA commissioner and frequent media commentator, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, sees this as one that most K-12 education should have some type of strategy in place, because that Delta variant will hit an unvaccinated population if it remains unvaccinated. So some types of control measures would be necessary at the school level, whether it be social distancing or mask or combinations or other methodologies may very well be needed. I'm going to move on from this one to the next topic, and we can catch up at the end of the next topic. I'll ask at that time, how do you feel about going out? 4% of the population believe that regional restrictions were lifted too soon. 34% of Americans, roughly one in three, say that restrictions were lifted too fast. But a little more than 1 in 4 said not enough. Some would say that's perfect, at least politically, almost perfect. But is it the best public health? Let's move on to the another priority of the administration: economic recovery. Economic recovery is robust. Chapman University, in a study they recently published, say it's going to be really strong in Orange County. That's consistent to the UCLA economic forecasting project that saw going to be economic recovery is going to be very strong in California. Labor market, lots of evidence that the labor market is strong for those seeking employment. They can be somewhat choosy, with hundreds of thousands of people quitting their jobs and optimism of finding better jobs. Very strong labor, increasing labor market in Southern California. Not back to where it was pre-pandemic, but much improved in America. And we've seen increases in average earnings as a consequence of this much stronger labor market, particularly increases in leisure, hospitality, retail, transportation, housing, employment, in terms of wages for those. Yet, if you look at the charts in terms of what do your wages pay for, and you say, you know, at what level do you have sufficient wages to kind of meet the necessities of life, you can see that those in the bottom 40%, in the bottom 40% are still underwater in terms of their costs exceed their income, while those in the highest 40% are either in excess or well in excess of their the revenues in excess of their necessity. So they're doing much better relatively. And if you look over time as employee compensation as a share of national income, if you go back to 1971, employee share of national income was almost 72%, and it has declined down to 66%. While corporate profits and proprietor incomes as a share of national income is close to where it was in in 1971, but it's seen a lot better days prior to the pandemic, and might have much better days ahead. California has joined other states in saying that they will not extend beyond the current federal supplemental compensation during the pandemic beyond September, and California will start reinstating that you have to be actively looking for a job to receive unemployment insurance. A provision that was stopped during the recession in most states and is being put back into place in almost all the other states now. But the big bugaboo continues to be inflation, or at least that's what you would believe is occurring if you just listen to TV, radio, watch TV, or read the paper. Is inflation the bigger threat than unemployment? Is inflation the bigger threat than income equality? Well, if you look at the papers, there's a good case to be made that inflation it has reared its ugly head, reached a 13-year high. Federal Reserve believes that it will go up to well above 3.5% by the end of this year. And inflation has had horrendous periods of time in America. Those of us who, and I imagine all of us can remember the 70s. It's not like the 60s. We can remember the 70s, I think, of high inflation. It's only in recent years in which we've been in the very low inflation period. And I can remember, because I was there before I went into local government, when I was doing political campaigns. I can remember in 1970 running a successful congressional challenger campaign in which inflation was the big issue, in which the cost of food, the cost of gasoline, the cost of everything was so high that led to a political revolt. And you look across the so many measures now, inflation is higher. The question is it temporary or will it be long lasting? Economists seem to be more on the line that it's temporary, but few are wanting to bet the farm literally on whether or not they are right. And of course, people are coming back to much higher costs in areas such as housing that they have to start dealing with. That they may have 10% higher in wage, but the housing costs or rental costs may just start soaring, so that they become economically unsure in the housing sector. Lumber went up and lumber went down. So there's a lot of evidence in some commodities that maybe this is temporary, maybe this is long-term. We have to wait and see. But inflation is not just what's happening in the America. It's happening across countries in the world because we're coming out of a recession. Coming out of a recession, that's what happens. It happens in China, it happens all over. Now, Republicans see this as a timely opportunity. I think they can see that as a unifying theme in the midterm elections. If inflation runs wild, they can say that the Biden administration said economic recovery was one of the major priorities, and see what they did. They overheated the economy, and you're paying much more for the items you pay, and you can blame them. Plus, it may give the Republicans an ability to wage war on the national debt ceiling when that comes due at the end of August, in which, while the Treasury can keep it going for a couple of months through other means of borrowing the money, it's like Republicans can refuse to vote to raise the national debt and cause great economic chaos to Democrats and the administration. We'll see if that's like a nuclear weapon to use, and it can blow up on you in the past, when Republicans have tried that, or when even Democrats have considered it, they usually back away as they start seeing the impact on the economy. And when the national government stops paying its bills. So let's discuss things. Let's talk about both the priorities of the pandemic and the priorities on the economy. At least those priorities being pursued by the Biden administration. I told you the ones on the pandemic before. How do you feel? Do you think we're just in a temporary period of high inflation, a temporary mismatch between goods and our ability to pay? And if we had to trade off between a little bit higher inflation and a more just wage structure, should that be an option? And that may not be an option. Is that worth it? And I guess the big question is it time to panic about inflation? Should you go out and buy things before they go up more? That's an excuse for me to buy things, but I don't think that's a normal thing that you should do. So let's talk.
Okay, I have Pete Saputo.
Pete.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, and your discussions are great. I buy a lot of lumber. I'm still working on the house, and I buy things at Home Depot and Lowe's.
He got muted accidentally.
Pete, you got muted accidentally.
Not sure how, but okay.
There you go.
Better?
Yeah,
There you go.
you're back.
You didn't like what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Okay, I understand.
You,
I think the lumber prices will come down as the mills get the help, because right now they can't find the help, and that's been the problem. Those are the ones that are making the money. The lumberjacks, the ones who cut the timber, their prices haven't gone up. The only price that we see creating an impact are the mills, and they're making a bundle. They are making. So.
I read one article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, Pete, how the mills decided not to expand their capacity because they liked the higher prices for a while, and they didn't think that the demand would be there for a while. So why invest but they do need people to run those mills.
Yeah, and it actually affects everything. I mean, it affects the housing industry to a great deal because it raises the price of the houses even greater than they are right now, which are out of line.
Particularly in Southern California, where we have so much.
Southern California and California in general, the prices of housing are just astronomical. Other parts of the country, not so bad, but still, the cost of building a home is up by almost 20% because of lumber prices. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mary Sampson. Mary Sampson.
I saw a commercial this morning advertising for employees for one of the Indian casinos. I don't remember which one it was, but it was, very spectacularly made and was promoting everything from medical coverage to free food. It was something that I had never seen before. And I imagine once they get their employees, you'll never see it again. But it was kind of a surprise to see it. I know there are a lot of places locally, restaurants and the like, that are advertising for cooks and now hiring, but that that was a surprise.
Right. Many businesses I read are doing signing bonuses, and sometimes several $1,000 signing bonuses that are obviously a contingent that you have to stay there for a certain amount of time, but are signing bonuses, including a gaming establishment in which you need the people. You need the people. The more people, the more tables, the more machines are running, the more restaurants, the more money you're making. They're very much.
Yeah, signing bonus was one of the things that was in this commercial.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to listen. Do you remember the which one?
I wish I could. I I thought, I know it's not Morongo.
Okay, that's okay.
It might have been Pala. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Next,
Rich Eaton.
Rich.
Yeah, I think this labor shortage may be temporary when the money runs out on the September 15th. Many of the states run by Republicans have already stopped the extra $300 a week. A lot of these jobs are entry level. You depend on tips and stuff. But why go to work? It basically is fairly hard work, where you get home and you can cover pretty much all your bills and stuff. And plus, you're not running up bills for paying for daycare, or you're paying for your gas and stuff. I think and part of it is it may be long term. It didn't help that the first act that the president did was stop the drilling, which immediately jacked the prices up of gasoline. And with the travel things really starting to heat up, if there's gasoline shortage and stuff, it will not make the president look good. I think that was a mistake, but that's neither here nor there. But I think the labor shortage should end every place by September 15th. And people have to understand those jobs are hard and stuff, but the people who handle those jobs, those are usually entry-level jobs. Majority of them will move up to higher wages just through the normal process as they develop skills and experience and they show up for work. You got to.
I heard one estimate, Rich, that maybe 100 to 200,000 jobs were directly related. I mean, each month directly related to maybe that's the first quantification I ever heard as to the minimum wage, particularly in those states with low minimum wages, in which you literally made more money staying home. And why go back into poverty, working in poverty, if you can stay home at least with an equivalent amount? And we'll see it's different, of course, in higher wage states, higher minimum wage states. But yeah, thank you very much.
Right.
Rona.
Yeah, I think if there's a bright spot to this pandemic going forward, it's going to be that the minimum wage is going to be higher, because as you said, people are now holding out because they want higher wages. And the employers are offering higher wages. And I think that this is going to be a balancing act. And we're going to find that as a result of the pandemic and as a result of the efforts of the government to keep people afloat during the pandemic, wages will go up, and maybe we will end up having a middle class after all, which is something that we desperately need.
I heard a statistic the other day that from a reliable source that the amount of spending on dining out, including fast food, eating out, is now returned to where it was pre-pandemic, with 1 million less workers. And some employers are going to think, I'll hire back some, but many will just be to extend the hours of people I have who are part-time. And we'll see. It's a very interesting dynamic now when in 1 month you may have 800,000 people just quit their jobs. That if you didn't have the quits in recent months, you would have more than 1 million jobs a month. But lots of quits of people saying, hey, I can do better. I'm optimistic. I can do better. That's probably generally a good sign, but we'll see how the dynamic works out. Thank you for your insight. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to another topic. The last priority we're going to talk about for the administration in today's discussion. We'll have other things during our remaining time, a half hour today. So let me move back to share the screen and go on. The infrastructure. This is the case in which a deal is possible. A deal is possible. The question is, at what point does the administration want a deal that is based on bipartisan votes and with all members of the Democratic caucus happily voting, or at least the more conservative or moderate Democrats from states that vote either for his predecessor, or are so-called purple states that can go either way, or does he go with a bigger list that may not get the votes, even from his own party, because of those moderate members who are insisting on trying to get a deal? So you have this negotiations has multiple levels. One, there's dollars for traditional infrastructure, street, highways, bridges, with some expansion, electric grids, ports, as well as infrastructure. It's finally recognized that infrastructure and airports and the rest of it. And there seems to be a growing consensus, at least in terms of spending there, that is bipartisan. There is very little consensus, and though this is not the immediate bill before the Congress this week, the human infrastructure, education, childcare, elder care investments. And then there is, how do you pay for the infrastructure, whether traditional or human infrastructure? Do you fund it through corporate or higher income tax, relief rollbacks that Democrats would want, or a majority of Democrats would want? Or do you do it through user fees like higher gas tax, which is odd because congressional Republicans in California argued that Democrats wanted gas tax increases just 4 years ago, but is preferred now by some of the conservative think tanks, such as the Reason Institute and the Heritage, user taxes. Or do you just increase the amount of money for the IRS to go after more wealthy taxpayers and plus corporations to pay for it? So how do you pay for it? That, at some level, probably at $1 trillion, you probably can find a compromise. You probably can find a compromise on traditional infrastructure. Probably can't find a compromise on human infrastructure, a compromise with Republican. And which deal do you take? How about the deal that were from the team designated by Mitch McConnell? Well, those negotiators basically have stopped negotiating. Or the bipartisan group of, I think it's 21 senators now, Democrats and Republicans, kind of the moderate coalition there. You may get to a deal this week, or you may not get to a deal this week, but they're close to a deal on traditional infrastructure and funding. Or do you go with the budget committee, particularly the one in the Senate that Senator Sanders ahead of, that we can do it through budget reconciliation, and we're going for something about $6 trillion altogether on everything we want. Whether or not Senator Manchin and others, more moderate Democrats or Democrats in areas that are not particularly friendly to Democrats would go along is troublesome in terms of being able to get the votes. So these measures, those are the big pictures. Getting close to a deal among that 21 senator coalition. Democrats who have tough re-elections are rooting and part of the 21 senators. Republicans in that group were pushing for gas tax increases, but apparently are willing to back away from that, knowing that that can be used against them by Democrats. And Democrats don't want to walk the plank of higher gas taxes, particularly Democrats from states that already have high gas taxes. I don't see California Democrats wanting to do that because they can say it's a regressive tax, or it is a regressive tax that oftentimes, because of energy incentives, climate change incentives, allow certain parts of the population with zero emission cars or low emission cars to not pay the entire amount in some communities, regardless of their income of the person who is driving. Biden has offered plenty of concessions. There's good evidence of that. And the Gang of 21 has offered concessions too. They're actually negotiating. If the president takes the deal, if there's a deal to be made among the 21, he's going to have, some bad blood with the progressive elements of the Democratic Party. And backing away from using infrastructure, whether human or traditional, to roll back tax benefits for wealthy individuals and families, as well as corporations, is against the grain of most Democrats, and particularly more progressive Democrats. Not doing enough on climate change. I don't think I put that in strong enough. Climate change is also a key portion of the infrastructure negotiations. Climate change incentives, climate change penalties, climate change law changes that can be done through the infrastructure package is another one. And Republicans, or a majority of Republicans, seem to have very little interest in enhancing the climate change spending or climate change measures that would result through a compromise bill. Very difficult negotiations. So let's talk a minute about infrastructure. I know it can be a very boring topic that you just want your streets and bridges fixed, so you're not like you're in Minnesota and the highway goes down. Anyone wants to talk about infrastructure? How important, what type of balance should the administration do? Is this something to get a deal almost no matter what, if you can move the ball at least a few feet?
Rich Eaton?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure is possible, but there has to be some trade-offs. Part of the thing is, I think the mileage thing might go through, because the people who buy electric cars, and no offense, I think that's very noteworthy, but they don't pay any gas taxes, and the gas tax is what finances the highways. So I think if they charge it on mileage, it'd be a benefit where the trucking industry wouldn't pay all the gas taxes, or people who are still driving gasoline cars or even hybrids. That may be not a non-starter in places like California or some other states like that, but I think that's one way to do it. One of the other infrastructure things was Nancy Pelosi wanted the bill to include a thing to pay off the pension debt for the state of California, which, it might work to get you elected in California, but if you're from one of these swing states and you voted to pay for the pension funds for California workers, you ain't going to get reelected. Sorry. And so, yeah, they're going to say, forget it. And now, and then all for putting aside, I get a state pension. So as far as I'm concerned, you can raise it as much as you want, but I have to be realistic. You won't get the vote in Missouri to pay for California.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marlene?
Just being totally pragmatic, though I would love to see the most comprehensive infrastructure bill possible, I think that more important is getting something passed that will make the Democrats and the Biden administration look good for the midterm elections. They need to get another big hefty bill passed like the COVID relief passed. Otherwise, I think we're going to lose the House and the Senate. So even if it has to be pared down and it has to be the more modified bipartisan bill, I think getting something done is just getting something done, even if it doesn't include all the nice education stuff, the labor stuff, all that. I think it has to get done, even if it's simple. That's my feeling.
Thank you very much.
And JR?
One of the things we saw in the last couple of weeks was somebody released tax returns from billionaires. And what we saw is they paid very little in taxes. And then one thing I did hear, and it's from a senator, not one of my favorites, Elizabeth Warren, and she talks about a wealth tax. It's a bad name. But what she was saying was that for people with investments, say more than $15 million, so is to tax that at maybe 0.5% or some small. and the return would be huge, because what we have is this upper income elite that don't pay much taxes, and they don't show any wages. They don't have wages like the rest of us, or did, and they're not getting taxed because they're just, they can cover it so many ways. So I thought this wealth tax, it's a bad name, but it kind of makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. We got a lot of topics in our last 15 minutes. Let's move through them. I appreciate all the comments so far. Well, let's talk a little bit about how the president is doing in terms of popularity. His job approval still remains positive, 51 to 43, but it is down from 54 and 40 just 2 weeks ago. Big dip. And when you drill down on it, it's mainly among Democrats. So that they disapprove of his progress. You have to do some more studies to find out why are Democrats. So they are but probably because the president is not matching the aspirations of the persons responding to the polls. The president did sign a piece of legislation adding a new federal holiday, Juneteenth, regarding when slavery was announced in the last place governed reached by the Union forces in the state of Texas. I understand that in Texas, Juneteenth is a state holiday, so it's not revolutionary in so many of the states, and I think that's why it allowed it to go through Congress pretty strongly. The president seems to be a target of American Catholic bishops who wish to deny him and other persons, and particularly targeted people like politicians who are so-called pro-choice or strong reproductive rights individuals, or some would say pro-abortion, from getting the Catholic communion. That process will continue. Mr. Biden during the campaign was denied in one church when he was campaigning, one Catholic church, getting the communion in that church. There is a split among American Catholics and a split among a majority American Catholic, and apparently the Vatican, which the Pope apparently feels this is not necessarily an appropriate means to sanction individuals. We'll see what will happen on this. Apparently, one of the strong supporters of doing the sanction is the Bishop of Los Angeles, who some of the press accounts has pointed out is not in harmony with the current Pope, who has passed him over several times for a cardinal slot. So we'll see what happens. This is more on a personal level. There is a lot of polling data that American Catholics, for the most part, are very close to the rest of Americans in terms of where they stand on issues of on the political spectrum on reproductive rights. That is, that they are as troubled or as supportive as most Americans. In the week ahead, apparently tomorrow, the president is going to announce a major effort on crime. Remember, we talked about that 2 weeks ago as an issue that is one that is potentially very deleterious to Democrats, at least in terms of the public perceptions of where Democrats are on crime prevention and crime suppression measures. The president is going to announce a program on that tomorrow. There are a number of challenges facing the president that he just can't wait. That means that he can want them to wait, but they aren't going to wait. Iran elected one of the hardest line presidents it's had since the Islamic Revolution a man who heads up the judiciary now, who's been signing death warrants since he was, some said since he was 20 years old, it will be the new president of Iran. Of course, the supreme Ayatollah there is the actual true power in that government. And he has ruled out any deals regarding their support of militia groups, which we call terrorist groups, in the Mideast, causing problems, particularly to Israel and other American allies in the Mideast, as well as restrictions on the ability to carry weapons, and that missiles are, he claims, off a limit to any of the current debates. However, the current negotiations on bringing America back into the Iranian nuclear deal appears to be getting close. So be interesting to find out if they reach that point, what will they have in them? If they don't have missiles in them, and if they don't have some restraints on the regional groups, it's hard to believe if there's political support in America to make that work. But we'll see. We'll see. The Wall Street Journal has pointed out in their conservative pages that this has proven that that the election of the new president has proven that in Iran that you just can't deal with them on nuclear and security controls. Tom Friedman of the New York Times writes, "Hey, you know, the best you can hope for in Iran is pretty bad, but you got to keep trying, and you got to keep engaged with them. As much as purists may want black and white, you have to deal with them. They're too big to be overthrown by U.S. influence, even by economic pressure. They just get more and more extreme the harder we push back. They're not going away. We need to deal with them. You need to deal with China has developed new weapons. It has a strong space programs, developing technology, has their own space station. Because we excluded them from the International Space Station because of the links between Russian cosmonauts and Chinese cosmonauts and the military. They continue to bring about the end of all individual freedoms in Hong Kong. China is off doing its thing. North Korea is getting more and more desperate. Mr. Kim has actually lost some weight, and some have speculated that may really show that there are problems in the country. Tense food situation. He told a party Congress recently that he intended to pursue both negotiations with the U.S., but also further developing their nuclear capabilities and their delivery capabilities through their missiles program. And by extension, he didn't say it, by sale of those technologies to other countries or non-nation actors. The border along Mexico keeps being a hot border down there. May was the busiest month along the Mexican border. If you look at past administration, you can see how strong the number of persons attempting to enter or successfully entering until caught the U.S. has been occurring. However, the administration's new policies about humanely treating minors and how they've done some of the immediate deportation, catch and return policies outside a country has reduced the number of deportations. So this is a tough thing for many Americans. They don't think the borders are strong enough, And it's a tough thing for many Democrats, thinking that the stalemate in Washington, D.C. in comprehensive immigration reform, including the future of the Dreamers, have been unaddressed by the two political parties. So let's move on. By the way, if you want to help Texas build the Texas border wall, they'll accept money from you. Taliban, is taking over district by district in Afghanistan. The one of the past presidents, and the one that we put a lot of credence on, talked about our 20-year war, that we have failed at 20-year war. He would like us to, of course, double down and work more, but doesn't appear. Pakistan told us not to expect any help from them in terms of checking the Taliban after we leave, in terms of bases. So very difficult situation. Let's move beyond that and talk a little bit about the president's foes before we end on a curious topic. I'll end on. Senator McConnell said last week that in 2024, should Republicans gain control of the Senate, it will be his, if he's the majority leader, which he anticipates he would be, he would block any Supreme Court appointments from President Biden. Matter of fact, he would take a hard look at any in 2023. So if you believe the Democrats are going to lose the U.S. Senate in 2024, or you're afraid that they might, the clock is ticking on Supreme Court appointment. If you look at what persons of one political party look at other persons of other political parties in terms of the question, I can't stand people on the other side of the aisle. Few countries have a greater distaste of opposition, people in opposition parties than Americans. And some, even in Germany, they kind of like the people in the other parties, multiple party system. So you don't have the duality we have in the U.S., but we are at one of the lowest in terms of good feeling towards the other political party. That hurts our political process. Okay, let's move on to that. I want to end on one other point. I wanted to bring back kind of the time machine. First, I want to remind you that, send me any topics you would like to discuss or any topics you'd like me to source out. Be happy to. Remember our class notes. Remember, I'll be back on Friday with Happy Note Hour. And at the beginning of the program, so many of our good instructors talked about programs they have immediately coming up. But I wanted to go back on one thing in our final 2 minutes here with you. I went back to the American presidency time machine and looked at what was happening at this point 4 years ago. What was happening on the 152nd day of the previous administration when I presented to class. So I went through and just pulled out some slides and changed the slides. I pulled out the slides. Want to remind you of the president's agenda, based upon media accounts and his own website in one case, energy, foreign policy, bringing back jobs to America, keep making Americans strong again, standing up with our law enforcement, trade deals that work for America, and getting rid of that Obamacare. And what happened the 2 weeks prior to the class? James Comey testified before Congress on his what happened when he was given the loyalty test by Mr. Trump, and then he had people attack him based upon saying bad things about the president, as well as the president was engaged in a tweet storm disparaging Mr. Comey. Attorney General Jeff Sessions had denied Russian collusions in the American election, and with him after the in interaction with him after the American election. You had the president having one of his first infrastructure weeks, talking about how his administration would deal with a robust infrastructure, one of the key platforms that he talked about during the campaign. But it went off the channel when he talked instead about Mr. Comey. The special counsel started, Mr. Mueller started probing Mr. Trump over the obstruction of justice charges. And Americans, according to an AP poll, believed that yeah, the president was that the president's campaign did collude in some measure with the Russians in the previous election. And the House and Senate were in major focus area on repealing Obamacare. They had to repeal Obamacare to control expenses. And that was a focus of congressional actions at the time. And the president was talking about Obamacare and ran into fact checkers on what he was saying and attributing certain costs to. But the president was, the economy was doing great guns, and the president was pointing to it, not only in jobs numbers, but in increases in the stock market. Stock market up 12% since election day, he pointed out. Unemployment at 16-year low. Economic growth expected to reach 2.3%, more than it was at 1.6. Now, this year, 4 years later, because we're coming off a pandemic, we may be at 6 or 7% growth. And you could see the stock market going up and down, the president pointing to that. And the president was going to sign a VA reform bill during the week, and the Supreme Court was considering one of the first challenges to his travel ban, one which I think they sent back, and they finally, in travel ban 3, they did approve. So those were some, and Gerald Kushner was on his way to Israel for Palestine peace talks. All of those things are happening at this time 4 years ago. President's approval rating, however, was inverted. 53% Americans disapproved compared to only 38.7%. In any case, that's what was happening 4 years ago. This will not be a common part of this discussion, but I thought it would be interesting since I had it to bring that up. I want to thank you all for being attentive today, and hope to see you in 2 weeks, in which we'll talk about, we'll have some of these priorities, some decisions on these priorities behind us by then. I hope you'll join me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.